The Subcommittee on Government Operations, Federal Workforce will come to order, and I want to welcome everybody. I apologize for our slight delay today. Without objection, Chair may declare a recess at any time. I recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. I want to thank Mr. Dondero for being here, his professionalism, not only to see things that Mr. Mfume and I may thoughtfully articulate with him. We have presented to him that we believe that's what we're here to do today, and we appreciate it. Today's hearing on Government Accountability's Office 2024 Annual Report on Fragmentation, Overlap, and Duplication is an important process that certainly has gone through with the GAO. Perhaps the core responsibility of this subcommittee is to ensure the business of government is conducted as efficiently as possible. This includes ensuring agencies provide excellence in customer care. It includes ensuring agencies have guardrails in place to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse, because, in fact, it's the taxpayer that is paying for the resources that this government operates. As we all know, not a new story, federal programs have not always been good stewards of public funding, nor a proper management, nor of the delivery of those services, perhaps that were expected by a customer, but perhaps more importantly, by Congress and our intent as we laid out in law and in appropriations for this government to perform services on the American people's behalf. And to be fair, even when federal agencies strive for excellence, there's always room for improvement. I spent 16 years in the private sector, had over 700 employees around the state of Texas, and it's difficult to always meet through the expectation of a customer to have employees always meet those expectations. But we will continue this conversation today, and we'll find out how we can get better. Oversight in this Congress has uncovered difficult ways federal programs have fallen short in efforts to achieve their mission on behalf of the American taxpayer. And although, Mr. Mfume, look forward to ask you questions, we want to hear your perspective. We believe that there is an interest that your agency has, not only in the performance of taxpayer money, but also because we believe federal employees too show up to work and want to gain confidence, not just in the work that they do, but to perform them admirably on behalf of those who might be customers, but are perhaps more importantly taxpayers. We've explored how to best measure the impact of widespread telework among federal workers to ensure that telework policies are implemented in a way that benefits the American people. We are not sure we have heard back from agencies properly about how they want to manage that, how they want to look at the metrics, how they would develop esprit within their agencies, what things they have learned, the things which would allow us to know more about them. And this federal government has been lacking in its performance and communication with this committee and subcommittee. We've called on the Internal Revenue Service, the State Department, Social Security Administration, and other agencies directly at the top of those organizations on a bipartisan basis to improve customer service, reduce backlogs, and overcome long-standing challenges with modernization in their information systems and the technology that they use. We've examined the federal response to natural disasters, including a field hearing in Florida where we saw firsthand recovery efforts from Hurricane Ian. I must say that we believe, because the agency reported back, that they felt like that we worked with them. They felt like our feedback and our attention enabled them to hone and focus what they believed they needed to do, perhaps that they had not been directly attaching success to those projects the way they would have wanted. We've urged the U.S. Postal Service leadership to take necessary action to ensure Americans have a reliable postal service for years to come. Far be it from me, but we're still in those negotiations. and we will continue and not give up on behalf of not only the American people, but we will look at this on a bipartisan issue because, in fact, the Postal Service is important to us whether you live in a city, whether you own a business, whether you're a senior citizen, or live in a rural area. So I'm proud to say our subcommittee, us working together, has conducted, I think, our work in a fair and bipartisan way. We think you being here today is important. We think the issues that you will bring to bear today are not only about the bottom line of money, but about the quality of service that your agency is expected to perform and deliver. In the last 14 years, actions to address GAO's recommendations in the report taken by Congress and federal agencies, I did not make this number up, it is reported $667 billion in financial benefits. There were just, again, this is a report that I fully accept, $71.3 billion in savings the past year. Does your agency make a difference? Yes, it does. Do other agencies within this federal government need to listen to you and continue that work? Yes, they do. And so today, as we spoke the other day, Mr. Dondero, I believe this subcommittee needs to do a better job of working with you, of us bringing agencies in and making sure they're achieving those things so that we can take the $71 billion and turn it into $100 billion later. We need to continue our efficiency. So we're pleased today to have Gene L. Dondero as a witness today, who's Comptroller General of the Government Accounting Office. We're also pleased to have members of his senior team that flank him, who also can provide additional information, as I'm sure they will do in notes, but it should be a pat on the back that you give them as not just federal employees, but people who are committed to the efficiency on behalf of the American people. So, with that said, I appreciate you being here, Gene. Longtime friend, long-term fan that I am of yours. And I yield the time to the distinguished ranking member of this subcommittee, Mr. Winfield, for any message he'd like to give us. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Dondero, special good morning to you. I want to thank you for your 51 years of service to the government. That is not just something passing in the night. It speaks to a great deal of dedication and a great deal of experience, and I want to commend you on the work over at GAO. As the chairman said, today's hearing really does focus on the GAO's 14th annual report on duplicative programs and opportunities for cost savings, allowing us, hopefully, to be able to zero in on the areas where we can work together to cut waste, to encourage greater collaboration, and to serve as better stewards of the American taxpayers' dollars. In keeping with what you've just heard, I do want to say that while we have your written testimony and it will be part of the official record, please feel free as we go through this exercise to elaborate on those things that you think are very important that may not be captured in that testimony. Promoting greater efficiency and effectiveness of all of our federal programs, agencies, offices, and initiatives government-wide is what this subcommittee is about. And we take great pride in being able to make sure that we dig as deep as we can to push the envelope to get the answers, to make sure that the American taxpayer, the American public is served properly. Since the report's genesis in 2011, Congress and the agencies have fully or partially addressed almost 73% of all of the matters and recommendations. And as Mr. Sessions just said, in that process, there was identification of $667 billion in financial benefits. That's no small number, and it is a great achievement. Congress and federal agencies have achieved these financial benefits through implementing, as you know, GAO's recommendations to eradicate duplication and fragmentation of many of our federal programs. Increased oversight of the Small Business Administration's Paycheck Protection Program, as an example, saved $13 billion alone, and this committee was in the forefront of making sure that we were able to underscore and to try to find a way to capture those funds. As we all know, COVID forced 45% of those same small businesses across the country to close their doors. The PPP authorized the SBA to distribute a record $659 billion to help small businesses across the country to be able to continue to pay their employees. However, as we all know, unscrupulous actors took full advantage of the crises and went about the task of defrauding the program and defrauding the taxpayer. The chairman and myself and members of this committee fought back against those instances of fraud. My own efforts here in the House included two bills, H.R. 5427 and H.R. 4666, that I co-sponsored and had passed through the House just last year. At the agency level, the SBA implemented an oversight plan, including an automated screening system to identify potentially ineligible fraudulent applicants and recipients, leading to billions of dollars in cost savings, again, for the taxpayer. This year's report identified 112 new matters and recommendations in 42 new topic areas for Congress or federal agencies to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of our government. These recommendations span across departments and branches of the government, calling on both the Congress and agencies to rise to the occasion, to take additional action towards ensuring that the government works better for all people and to do so as quickly as possible. As we consider methods to reduce unnecessary spending, I think it's important to point out that the House is voting this week to fund the Department of Defense with probably two different vehicles for the second week in a row. And I mention that because over the past 14 years, GAO has identified $197 billion in ways to cut costs at DOD. Notably, DOD still has the highest number of open duplication cases and the highest number of cost-saving recommendations that have not been fully implemented. The Department of Defense has a history of challenges with its financial management systems and business processes, internal controls, and financial reporting. And to that extent, sir, the GAO noted that DOD in particular should, quote, improve oversight of its financial management systems, allowing for more informed investment decisions which could result in cost savings and a clean audit opinion. I understand, members of this committee also understand the importance of funding our military to protect democracy at home and abroad. However, we must really work to eliminate and not exacerbate duplicative efforts to ensure our nation and our troops get the greatest value out of every dollar spent. So, Mr. Dodaro, this report is a critical service to the Congress. We appreciate it. It gives all of us a chance to develop a third eye and to look deeper into how we are doing what we do and to ask the deeper questions, are we doing it as best as we can? The GAO traditionally has been an important ally to the subcommittee's work in increasing the effectiveness and the efficiency of federal government. I look more forward to hearing more of your testimony before the subcommittee. I want to thank you again for your 51 years of service, and I yield back to the chairman.
I want to thank the gentleman, my colleague, Mr. Mfume, for not only his comments, but also his professional viewpoint that permeates, as well as my viewpoint, it permeates his minority members who take time, who care very much about the success of our government. I'm pleased today to introduce today's witness, Comptroller General Gene Dondero, who brings more than 50 years of experience at the Government Accounting Office. As Comptroller General for the past 14 years, Mr. Dondero has overseen the development of issues of hundreds of reports and testimonies that are given to Congress every year, efforts that ultimately help to identify mitigation and mitigate fraud, waste, and abuse in federal programs. And today we'll hear about duplication also. He's testified before Congress each of those years dozens of times to provide nonpartisan insights into some of the most pressing federal oversight. I must suggest to, and Mr. Mpume believes this because I do too, the balance, the devotion, and the dedication to service to this great nation, Mr. Dondero, is truly to be something that is a model that other federal agencies and other federal employees should be following, and we think you head that list. Thank you for being here. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses may, or the witness, as you are, Mr. Dondero, please rise, stand, raise your right hand, and I will, we do have others that will be giving testimony. I've heard that, but I didn't know for sure that they were who they are. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses, each of them, have answered in the affirmative. I want to thank each of you for being here today, and I think the importance of what we're doing here today reminds me that the witnesses are necessary and needed because of the scope of what we intend to do today. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge, and Mr. Mpume, I don't know if you have knowledge of students, but we have students from that are attending today from Texas A&M University and Stephen F. Austin State University, who are here to not only see how government works, but to see the importance of testimony of what information is given to Congress. And so I want to thank those students who are here. Yes, sir.
Could they identify themselves by just holding up their hands?
It's these, I see one, two, or there, we got at least two of them. Oh, somebody, which I can't see, three of them.
Okay.
That may be a young man from, who is from Florida State University or perhaps University of Oregon, I can't tell. We've got about 20 interns that are in our office this month, and so I think I was pretty close to being right.
Well, thank you and welcome. I've got my own intern here also, so he's part of the clan.
Good. Thank you very much. So if I could, please remind the witnesses that we have read your written statements and it will appear in the full hearing record. Please limit your statement to 5 minutes. However, with that said, as I told Mr. Dondero, I'd like for him to complete not just his sentence, but his thought and thinking. So we have a slow gavel that Mr. Mpume and I really enjoy, and so we're going to recognize that. And now recognize Gene Dondero for his opening statement. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Mpume, members of the subcommittee. I'm very pleased to be here today to discuss our latest report. I want to also recognize, most of you recognize interns here. We have 16 people from 16 different countries, the National Audit Offices, or GAO, for a 3-year program of development, so they're in attendance here today as well.
So they want to see Exhibit A today. And that's what you will do, and I hope that the performance today on all of our positions are well covered, because you see the American people need to have confidence that not only can we work and listen with each other, but we go to fix instead of the fight.
I appreciate that. And thank you for your kind comments about GAO and the importance of our agency. We have one of the most dedicated and talented workforces in the world. And for the recognition of the achievement of over $667 billion so far, and Mr. Mpume, you mentioned the 73%. That's of over 2,000 recommendations that we've made. So it's had broad impact. And so I'm very proud to talk about this year's new areas. They're very important areas to public safety and national security. These deal with national disease surveillance programs, particularly for zoonotic diseases that can be transmitted to humans, which has caused about 75% of all new and emerging infectious diseases, to provide more comprehensive warnings for tsunamis, to provide additional biosurveillance so that we're aware of any particular new and emerging threats, to deal with the threats of wildfire smoke, which have grown in importance as the wildfires have become more prevalent over time. It deals with improvements to service member fatigue at DOD, which has led to deaths of many service members and the destruction of much equipment, as well. So it has important security implications. It deals with background investigations, which we see as being duplicated from when a person moves from one agency to another. It deals with better coordination to protect federal research from threats of foreign actors. And so all these recommendations are really designed to help improve the coordination and collaboration of many agencies that we see now have to work on some of these more difficult issues that need to be addressed. And it's important for economy and efficiency and effectiveness for greater collaboration among actors, not only at the federal government level, but also in partnership with the state and local, in some cases private sector entities that need to be involved in these areas. Now, the open recommendations that we have also are for cost savings and revenue enhancements. So we've got a number of recommendations of things that could be done to save money. For example, in the Medicare program for management evaluation services, now if you go to a hospital, a doctor that's affiliated with a hospital, the government pays you more than if you go to a doctor in a private practice, not affiliated with the hospital. If you equalize those payments and made them site neutral, CBO estimates that you would save $141 billion over 10 years. Also, importantly, the FirstNet program, which is to support our first responders, will be out of authorization within the next couple of years. So it needs to be reauthorized by Congress in order to make sure that they can collect the revenue necessary to fund the system. That's $15 billion that needs to be, it could be accrued to the government to prevent the government from having to subsidize that process over time and have it user paid for. We have other recommendations in the Medicaid demonstration area to make that more budget neutral. If Congress could put those requirements in place, it could save money. The bottom line here is that there's tens of billions of dollars in additional funding that can come from implementing our new and open recommendations from our past work, in addition to making the government more effective and efficient to better serve the American people. So I'm proud to be here today to represent our work and look forward to responding to your questions.
Yep, got it. Yeah, thank the gentleman very much. You and I spoke on the phone in the last few days, and I told you that I think we in Congress should work closer with you, not just to hear back from you and read the reports and go to the agencies, but actually to engage people off what we think is important issues. And while you talked about wildfire smoke and background checks and savings and Medicare savings, and I think that we need to do a better job to look at these and specifically challenge these agencies and the heads of the agencies to achieve these things. And I know that from time to time there are hardships which are encountered, but I think it will take the federal government workers to be at work. I think they've got to come to work, and I think that this is a major issue that we in our subcommittee have been dealing with, of trying to work with someone who felt like they could make this stay-at-home model and working with through telework. But I think that we are going to have to take on some of these issues. What are the 2 or 3 things that you can think of that if we decided you wanted us to do something that you'd like to ask us to work on with you? Specifically highlight them, stay after them, work with the agencies, make sure that on a bipartisan basis and bicameral basis, up to and including whoever's going to be the chosen secretaries that will lead these agencies, this next year?
Yeah, there are a number of issues that come to mind. Number one, over the last 14 years, if we've done this work on overlap, duplication, fragmentation, the statute requires us to just look at duplication. But we look at fragmentation and overlap as harbingers of potential duplication, but it also undermines the effectiveness of federal action to serve the public effectively. And because more and more agencies need to be involved in solving some of these problems, there needs to be good collaboration. So we published 8 criteria that if you follow, you can have effective collaboration. There are things like defining common outcomes, making clear leadership for the effort, clarifying roles and responsibilities, articulating the resources that you need, involving all the right parties, having written agreements, and ensuring accountability. These are basic management tenets that, if implemented successfully, would make the government much more effective in dealing with these public safety issues and national security issues. And I would urge the Congress, and would greatly appreciate working with you, to enshrine these 8 criteria in law and have every interagency committee that's established, many of them are established by Congress, but regardless of how they're established, to follow these 8 criteria. If they do, they'll have much more outcome over time. This is a common problem that we find year in and year out, and some agencies do better than others, so that's number one. Number two is that every year I send a letter to every head of a department, major department and agency in the federal government, including independent regulators, and outlining open GAO recommendations. And I prioritize a subset of those recommendations that could have the biggest impact in improving their agency's operations. And those reports go to the Congress. They're also made public. But if we had follow-up on those reports by the Congress, that would be very effective. Also, I would recommend that Congress act on matters that we've put forth that are still open. There are 21 matters we put before the Congress that have the ability to save money. 12 of them would save over $1 billion, and the other 18 would save hundreds of millions, if not millions of dollars. And so those, I'd be happy to provide a list to the committee, and will encourage action on those recommendations. Also, as I've worked with you in the past, Mr. Chairman, we've worked on the GAO high-risk list, which is a different series than the overlap and duplication. But that has 37 areas on there, and there's many common issues of both areas. So that's another area that I'd like to work with the Congress on, because those should be top of mind on congressional oversight agendas. And they've been used to help shape the president's management agendas, going back many presidents over many administrations, since we've been having that program since 1990. That program's also saved about $675 billion in financial benefits to the taxpayer. So these things focus on key areas, important to our country, important to our citizens, and represent great opportunities for greater improvement.
The way I have looked at it in years past was we have a federal government that sees lots of missions and good ideas out there. And agency after agency participates in these things, but there's the duplication that you speak of, and that is really why you're where you are. That's why your agency's expected to be there. Okay, I'm going to take these up, and Mr. Mfume and I talked about what we're going to be doing when we get back in a week. We're going to be on break back home for work. But we're going to get back together and establish what we're going to do these final few months. But I think that that's a clear mandate for us to be involved in that. And I want to thank you for the clarity involved. And I consider what you said also a challenge. So we're going to have to find if we're up to that. Thank you very much. Mr. Mfume, you're recognized.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, couple of quick things in the amount of time that I have. I wanted to cover just a couple of issues that are of great importance to me and to the district that I represent. When GAO published last year's duplication report, I noticed that it recommended that the IRS in particular do more to improve efforts to audit high-income taxpayers and ensure that they were paying their fair share. And then, as you know, I saw the GAO report released this past April, entitled Tax Enforcement IRS Selection Processes for Returns Claiming Refundable Credits Could Better Address Equity. So it is this issue of equity that concerns me. Mr. Chairman, I would like to offer for entrance into the record that full report.
Without objection, that'll be in the record.
And according to the report, Mr. Darrow, earned income tax credit return audits conducted by the Wage and Investment Division of IRS included higher numbers of audits of Black EITC recipients, which strikes me as puzzling. And that stood out and still stands out, and for me it begs some sort of answer, and I have not seen it yet from the IRS, but we will continue to push on that. That EITC was designed to boost the income of eligible low and moderate income workers, particularly those who have children, and is the largest federal anti-poverty program serving approximately 26 million people. And as you know, audits conducted by the IRS often delay tax returns, harm lower income families, harm all of us actually. And so I agree with the duplication report's findings and recommendations, and I recognize that IRS's acceptance of the 6 recommendations was a good first step, only the first step. But there is, in my opinion, a need to decrease significantly the algorithmic bias that exists in the dependent database that they use. I'll give you a case in point. Maybe I'll ask you a question, because it seems to me that using that biometric system with built-in biases goes against equity and is almost punitive, particularly for darker-skinned individuals who the biometrics read differently and create a listing of things or concerns that really aren't sufficient and have no real support. So I've been concerned about that, and I remain concerned also that the very opposite of what we have charged the IRS to do in those 6 recommendations may be worsening the impact on African American taxpayers, which I think is inherently wrong and incorrect. So I would really commend your work in this area and encourage the GAO to continue to push even harder for agencies, in this case we're talking about the IRS, to come up with options to the biometric system that will allow people to be able to not run into these impediments. And we can't be certain that the private sector is going to prioritize and vet these same concerns. I mean, that's not what they're driven by. They're driven by a lot of other things, not the least of which are concerns that relate back to equity and to race. As you continue your annual assessment of identifying additional opportunities for greater efficiency and effectiveness, can you tell the committee briefly how we can work together to ensure that the technologies, because this is where we are with the algorithmic system and biometric biases, how we can work together that those technologies are used in such a way to administer programs and services equitably?
Yeah, absolutely. First, with regard to the tax system, tax administration's been our high-risk list since 1990 because of a lot of issues associated with how we approach enforcement. You know, our system's based on voluntary compliance, but that means that people have to have faith that it's fair, it's equitable, and it deals with issues. And so we've got a lot of recommendations on how IRS can better select and the models that they use in order to determine who to audit can be done better, more effectively, and more fairly. And we'll continue to press on that issues. Now, with regard to the technologies, You know, I've established the Science Technology Assessment Analytics Group, tripled the size of it over the past few years. We've done work on facial recognition technologies, talking about the biases, particularly of people of color, and some limitations and the shortcomings of those programs. I'm very concerned as the federal government goes to implement artificial intelligence applications that the quality of their information is suspect in many cases, not complete, not accurate, not reliable, and in some cases could have built-in biases in those systems. So we're going to be looking at this issue very carefully because artificial intelligence, if we don't improve the data and make sure it's fair going into the systems, you're going to get bad outcomes faster. And it's not going to provide all the benefits that it could provide unless we have the proper safeguards in place. So we're working on that, and I'm happy to talk about the different technologies and what could be done in those areas. We've hired a lot of scientists. I've got data scientists and others, and so we're all over that issue, and I'm happy to work with you.
Thank you very much. Before I yield back, login.gov, which both the chairman, myself, and members of this committee have been overseeing for some time now, has, in my opinion, those same issues and challenges. And they become punitive to the extent that when people are denied because of a system that is not fail-safe, we create more of a problem. So we're on the record with login.gov because we think that there has to be more options available for them to do their job when it comes to the people they're serving. So I know I've gone beyond my
Well,
time.
we have, I would just say, given the slow gavel, that we're doing work currently on login.gov, and we're happy to share the scope of that work with both of you and your staff and to provide the results of that effort. I share your concern. I think there has to be more options. There have to be better ways of identity verification to provide greater safeguards and assurance to the public that it's going to be done properly. And the government's going to be protected, too, because the fraud during the pandemic programs was epic. You know, we've estimated that between 2018 and 2022, the losses to the federal government of fraud were between $233 billion to $521 billion annually, depending on the risk level and the amount of funding over those areas. So it's very important we do safeguards, but you can't do it at the expense of fair treatment to all people.
I agree, and we've had a panel of inspector generals come before us to underscore how deeply that fraud went and to suggest on the record that it might take 8 or 9 additional years before everybody who were the bad actors are caught and prosecuted. So it's a long-term process.
Yeah, and even if we catch everybody, you're not going to recover the money. It would be less than 10% by historical standards. So we have to prevent fraud in the first place. We worked with the Congress in the past to pass what was the Fraud Reduction Data Analytics Act in 2016 to put best practices for fraud prevention in place. So the agencies, if they had acted quickly, would have been much better prepared before the pandemic. One of the things, for example, is to do a fraud risk assessment. The first fraud risk assessment SBA did, based on its 2016 law, was in February 2022 after all the money had been spent. So, they should have been better prepared, and that's an area that fraud prevention that I think is another area that we could work on together to make sure agencies are putting in place the practices necessary to prevent it in the first place. It's the only way to safeguard taxpayer funds effectively.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Exactly to our point, you got to stop this by identifying it and fix it. It's got to be done. We're going to yield to the distinguished gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Timmons. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witness, Comptroller General Dodar, for being here today. With our national debt quickly approaching $35 trillion, it really is past time to have serious conversations about government spending. I firmly believe our national debt is the greatest threat to national security, and Congress must address it now. We cannot continue to ignore our failing fiscal trajectory. Debt held by the public is expected to reach $45 trillion, or 114% of GDP by 2033, and the longer we wait, the harder it's going to be to fix. And doing nothing is simply not an option. We are here today to discuss GAO's annual duplication report and evaluate the effectiveness of our agency's efforts to prevent waste and realize billions of dollars in cost savings for taxpayers. 2 weeks ago, I questioned the Director of Office of Personnel Management about the concerning issue of telework, which started with the COVID-19 pandemic and is still continuing today. A great deal has been said about telework in federal agencies, but most concerning to me is that we have yet to see any data regarding the supposed benefits of telework. And at this point, it has been years since the Biden administration announced expanded telework was going to be the new norm. I asked the director what evidence he had regarding the value of telework. More specifically, I asked if any data exists showing that widespread federal telework is as effective and good for the taxpayer as in-person work. His response was the following, quote, "The work arrangements we have at OPM, which include telework, are consistent with the performance improvement that we are seeing from our agency." End quote. I also asked the director if OPM had reduced its cost as a result of reduced physical office space, since many of its employees are continuing to work from home, but the answer was quite vague. The director said, "We have let go some leased space around the country, and we have more work to do to get to a steady state." So if we're going to have telework, I feel like we should have some cost savings in leased space. The federal office space utilization segment of the duplication report shows that the federal government owns over 460 million square feet of office space that costs billions of dollars annually to operate and maintain. Is that correct, Mr. Dodara?
Yes.
Thank you. In a 2023 sample survey, GAO found that 17 of 24 agencies overseen by the council used an estimated average of 25% or less of their headquarters building's capacity. 25% or less of the 460 million square feet. And agencies at the higher end of the range used only an estimated 40 to 49% of the capacity of their headquarters during that time frame. So my question is this: how is it that significant percentage of agency employees are working from home and have been doing so since the pandemic, and yet agencies like OPM have only let go some, if any, leased space?
Yes. I'll ask Dave Maroney to elaborate. Congressman Timmons, good to
Thank
see you.
Great to see you.
But I would say one thing first is that we've had real property management in the federal government on our high-risk list since 2007. There was unused federal property before the pandemic, and the federal government was doing a very poor job of disposing of that property, and there should have been much more cost savings. And I agree with you. If you're going to move in this direction, you can prove telework's effective for your agency, and you're focused on the right outcomes, productivity, and the quality of the work. You can't have extra space. You should be able to get rid of it. Dave?
Thank you.
Right, and to your point, Congressman, that's certainly a concern that we have looked at in terms of the low utilization of federal office space in the post-pandemic. As the Comptroller General noted, this is a longstanding problem, but it has gotten considerably worse with increases in telework. And so our recommendation to agencies have been for OMB in coordination with the Federal Real Property Council, which is the senior real property officials across the government, to develop benchmarks for determining how much space they are utilizing and then move forward to get rid of that space that they don't need. It has significant financial costs to hold on to unneeded space, obviously, but also environmental costs. You're using energy and water for those buildings, regardless if someone's at their desk or not. Has opportunity costs. Agencies are spending money on space they don't need. That means that's not money for their mission. Also means the local communities where those buildings aren't able to get the most out of that area either. So definitely a concern. The agencies do need to move forward on making decisions about their space.
No, I appreciate that. I think we could get a lot more aggressive on this. And, even here in the Capitol, the cost of office space is enormous. So, as we consider relocating agencies and, going to more telework, this is something that is a very simple cost savings that would be enormous. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars a year, and again, $35 trillion in debt, $2 trillion deficit, and we're increasing our debt by $1 trillion every 100 days. These are all like major challenges that we have to face, and I think that this is a really good space if indeed we're stuck with telework, which I don't particularly like, but if that's the direction that these agencies are going to go, at the very least, let's save some taxpayer dollars.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you very much. Gentlewoman, Ms. Lee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd also like to thank Mr. Dodaro for coming to speak on the important work of GAO's duplication report. Part of the Republican playbook is to slash funding to government agencies and then cry foul when they can't function properly, to continue shielding their corporate donors from any oversight or responsibility. But we know that the only way to truly deliver for the American people is to fully and properly invest in the programs meant to serve them. This includes investment in the right people, processes, and technologies. Mr. Dodaro, GAO is a great example of an agency where more investment in your people and resources yields better results for the American people, correct?
That's right.
This great return on taxpayer investment is especially true when it comes to the IRS. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office found that an $80 billion investment in the IRS would increase federal revenue by $200 billion over 10 years. Despite these findings, just last week, my Republican colleagues announced that they want to slash IRS funding further and cut the direct file program, a wildly successful pilot that makes filing taxes easier for thousands of Americans. We know that cutting this program doesn't benefit taxpayers, but is a gift to tax filing services like TurboTax that spends millions lobbying them. Just this tax season, that limited direct file program saw 140,000 taxpayers claim more than $90 million in refunds and save an estimated $5.6 million in filing costs. Imagine the impact on a nationwide scale. Republicans specifically seek to gut the IRS's enforcement budget. So to summarize, they want to both make it harder for everyday Americans to comply with tax law and make it easier for the wealthiest Americans to get away with refusing to pay their fair share. GAO's work really highlights the way resources tie with outcomes, especially at the IRS. In May of 2022, GAO found that the IRS has significantly reduced audits of individuals who report higher amounts of income. So the Treasury announced a goal to increase audits of high income and high wealth earners. Mr. Dodaro, is the IRS on track to meet that goal?
Yes, they are. It's 8%, and yes, they are. But we think they can do a better job at who they select and how they train their people up to be more effective.
Thank you. Earlier this year, GAO recommended that the IRS develop plans to evaluate how they select which tax returns to audit. How could improving these selection criteria help the IRS enforce our nation's tax laws more effectively and equitably?
Yes. What we found for taxpayers on very wealthy, high-income people, also for large partnerships, complex partnerships, that many of the audits they do don't result in any increase in revenue, which means that they're targeting compliant taxpayers, so it's not benefiting the government and additional revenue and burdening those taxpayers. So we think the models could be done better to better target where we're likely to see noncompliance and therefore additional revenues appropriately to the current tax laws that come to the government. You know, there's a huge tax gap between.
I was going to ask, where are we likely to see more noncompliance, but.
No, I don't think so. I think if you target it properly, you'll see better compliance.
So just to sum this up, for decades, the IRS has disproportionately audited low-income people. Because those audits are quick and easy for them, filing taxes has also just been a nightmare for most folks. How many people have hit April, right, spent the money for filing help, and then been nailed with an unexpected tax bill? Or conversely, how many rely on that tax refund to come through and be accurate? Now we're finally seeing the IRS start to go after the wealthy tax cheats, the ones who are intentionally hiding their money instead of the regular people who are making mistakes. And we're finally seeing that the start of a way to make filing taxes less stressful and cost less money. But without the continued resources, talent, and technologies to complete these goals, they're just going to keep going after regular people. And that just isn't right or fair. I thank you. And I have no further comment unless you do with the 38 seconds that we have.
This is an area, as I mentioned, tax administration that we focused on as a high-risk area since 1990. It's still on the list. There's much more that could be done, that IRS could use its resources more effectively, and we could have a more fair and equitable and efficient tax system.
Thank you. We'd all like to see that. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Mr. Frost recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So GAO investigated several national security issues at the Department of Defense and made important information sharing and operational efficiency recommendations to the department. The Pentagon frequently conducts simulations of conflicts or scenarios, so-called war games, to play at the dynamics of potential conflicts across the entire world. These exercises can yield insights that feed future strategies and policies for evaluating potential threats and adversaries. Simulations inform DoD's decision about warfare concepts, capabilities, and plans, and each branch hosts their own war games as well as participating in simulations as well. So, Mr. Dodaro, what would GAO recommend that the Department of Defense do differently to make sure that these exercises have a greater benefit to national security?
Yes, the department established a central repository in 2015 to collect all this information to help make the future plans more effective and to also then learn from the results and share the results across the department. But it's very fragmented. Nobody's in charge, so we recommend you put somebody in charge of the program to lead it over time to make it more effective, and that you have better reporting of information into a central database that would be complete and reliable and allow more effective treatment. The department agreed with our recommendation and has commissioned a study to figure out how best to do this. You know, the department, as you mentioned, when we were charged with looking at overlap, duplication, fragmentation, DOD's kind of like the poster child for this area because they're so large and decentralized. And so there's a lot of opportunities. And it's because they're committed to their mission, but everybody's enthusiastic and they start off in launching, trying to improve these areas in good faith, but they don't have central management leadership as much as they need.
Yeah, I mean, on the topic of the duplication report, this subcommittee held a hearing on examining the root causes of DOD's financial statements and why they can't be audited. What does GAO suggest DOD do to help make sure that it works towards a successful audit?
Yes. First, I might say that they got a clean opinion this year for the Marine Corps for the first time, so I was encouraged by that. They have a good plan, but they need to fix the problems that their independent auditors identify more promptly. They're not really fixing them as much as possible. They also need to get the better control.
Why do you think they're not fixing it as fast?
Well, it's a matter of resources to them. I mean, there's a lot of benefits that they've received from this thing.
Yeah.
And the auditors keep finding like hundreds of problems, so that the number keeps growing, but the percentage of them fixing them is stuck at around 20-some% of the corrective action. So they need to move faster. But most of the recommendations, Congressman Frost, deal with their financial systems. Their systems are not designed properly. They have a process now that they put in place to make sure that they're certified, that they meet all the requirements, and they're going to be auditable, you know. But that compliance with those requirements is lacking. And so we've recommended that they better stick with the guidelines they have in place to certify these systems, not only new ones under development, but existing systems. And so we're waiting for them to react to our recommendations there. They said they agreed, but we'll see what they do to implement it. But the system fixes are at the root cause of many of these corrective actions, and that's why you don't see greater progress.
Yeah. I mean, and the reasoning of resources, I don't know. I don't quite buy it, as we're nearing almost $1 trillion defense budget, one I would say is quite inflated. But last thing really quick, GAO also noted fragmentation in DoD research projects on service member fatigue. The report specifically mentions that the repeated use of wearable devices such as smartwatches and heart monitors to identify and mitigate the root causes of service member fatigue. DoD has conducted nearly 50 different studies on this. What did GAO recommend that DoD change when it comes to studying the fatigue of service members?
I'll ask Kathy Barrick to do it. She's our expert in defense capabilities management.
Yeah, thank you. Service member fatigue is really a significant issue at DoD. By DoD's own studies of their service members, 2/3 are reporting getting 6 hours or 6 or few hours of sleep a night. So it's a readiness issue, it's a safety issue, it's a health issue. So there's a lot of research.
And a workplace issue.
And a workplace issue, exactly. There's a lot of research going on in the department, both monitoring service members' sleep, but also looking at things like environmental factors, how can we make, increase the quality of sleep, as well as the health impacts of sleep. We identified 130 research projects, and as you mentioned, 48 in particular were related to wearable technologies that track service members' sleep. These projects were very fragmented. Some of them were looking at the exact same technologies, the exact same models, and there was no coordination within the department to partner on some of this research. And as you can imagine, lots of different offices within DoD are doing this. We looked at cost information for 29 of these 48 projects. It was $25 million. DoD's planning on investing hundreds of millions, million more in this area. The Defense Health Agency, for example, is going to let a contract for $350 million to look at 6 wearable technologies. So there's a lot of opportunity for potential efficiencies. If DoD doesn't procure one of these technologies, it's tens of thousands in savings and potentially hundreds of millions.
Thank you so much. I yield back, and thank you to the chair for allowing the overage.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentlewoman, Ms. Tlaib, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for being here. One of the areas, I know there's a lot of duplication in regards to, like, for instance, with, even rural housing with HUD, it tends to overlap because Department of Ag is mostly present in some of our rural communities. But the one area that I know my residents were excited about and hearing in regards to the Justice 40 initiative, and I want to kind of try to focus on that. We had started a We Have a Right to Breathe campaign in my district. We've been fighting really just at the front lines about clean water and the importance of that. And so I know Justice 40 involves tens of billions of dollars fragmented across, I think, 500 federal agencies. And so could you speak a little bit about some of the improvements that GAO has already seen and what you would like to see going forward? And because for many of my residents, they'll hear these, they'll see the press releases, they'll see the announcements, but implementation matters so much to them. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I'd be happy to. You're right, there are 500 programs, about 19 different agencies. It's been coordinated out of the Executive Office of the President, Council for Environmental Quality, OMB, and the Climate Policy Office are all coordinating it. So they've developed some guidance initially and reached out and tried to get some input. So that was a good first step. But the guidance needs to be more.
I'm sorry, is that from that January 2024 report that you all put out? I think it.
Yes?
Yes. Yeah, okay, I saw that.
And yes, and we made some recommendations in that report. For example, there's another group in the White House on environmental justice and Interagency Council, and they weren't using that group as effectively as we think they could use that group. So we asked for greater coordination there. And then they have recently issued some additional guidance which would, if effectively implemented, follow our recommendations in the GAO reports and also institute this collaboration criteria I mentioned earlier. We have 8 criteria that, if effectively followed, will ensure better outcomes in the programs. And specifically as it relates to Justice 40, what outcomes do they want to achieve? How are they going to establish performance measures and track progress and report and provide information on what benefits have accrued as a result of the initiative, and have greater transparency so that the Congress and the public and your constituents can see what's happened as a result of the initiative. I mean, it's very significant because about 40% of the money being spent in these areas is to go to disadvantaged communities.
And even in your report, even with your guidelines, which I appreciate them being proactive. I mean, they're using the right language. It's the same kind of language we've been using for quite a long time, even before the Flint crisis. But again, going back to implementation matters. Is there anything that we should be doing as Congress members in regards to that? Because of course 40%, right, has to go. I'm just not seeing the implementation on the ground, if that makes any sense.
I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we're going to follow implementation. I'll ask Mr. Gaffigan, who's our managing director in this area, to talk about what work we have underway. We have a lot of work underway in the Justice 40 area.
Yeah, Representative, we're following up on the implementation. We're going to follow the money. One of the key challenges was identifying the disadvantaged communities and how to target these 500 programs. Also making sure that barriers for communities' access to these programs are dealt with and addressed. So we're going to follow up on that. And we're also sort of going to look at this scorecard, which was sort of to track where the money was going, what the results are. And so we've made a lot of recommendations to set these things up, and now we're going to follow through. And that work's being done for this committee.
Pay attention to the technical assistance centers.
Yes.
And because that's what our frontline community-based organizations that have been doing environmental justice work has been told, go to the technical assistance centers that are assigned to your region. For Region 5, we have 2, and we've been reaching out. They just now finally, I think, got some sort of guidance. But yet my residents are like, where do we apply? Is somebody going to help us write the grant? How do we get this money to the people? I mean, it's a great title. It's great words being used. Again, please follow up with my office, and I would love to be a partner in making sure, again, that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Absolutely. We plan to be out there kicking the tires. We've also addressed these issues when it comes to tribal nations and their access to the thing.
Yeah,
so that's on our radar, and we're doing work, diving in.
Thank you.
But we'll work with your office. You'll give us a good litmus test to make
Yes.
sure we're getting the ground truth.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure, happy to do so.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Distinguished gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, recognized.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. Mr. Dodaro, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here. Appreciate your work and your testimony today and your report that you provided to us. One of the open topic areas discussed in your written testimony is the need for the Department of Education to obtain data to verify income information for borrowers reporting zero income when applying for income-driven repayment plans for federal student loans. Did you make any specific recommendations, and please tell us about potential for implementation of those recommendations?
Yes, thank you for that. That's an important question. When we first looked at this issue, we found over 95,000 plans. That was over 10% of the whole plans reported zero income. And education was taking the self-certification of the people and not verifying it in any way. So we thought you need to verify that to make sure. We saw what self-certification did during the pandemic, and it didn't work out so well. And so that's not a good technique. And so we recommended they do something. Now, Congress has given them now the authority to use tax data. But the applicant for the income-driven repayment program has to allow the IRS, their data to be accessed by IRS and reported to the Education Department. And in the efforts to take applications for further plans, because some people change their plans or apply for new ones, about 70%, a little over 70% of the people allowed education to access their tax data. The other ones didn't. So the question is, how is education now going to use other information, which could be commercial sources, or it could be the new hire database that's collected by HHS that collects current wage data. It's used for child enforcement purposes, but that's what we used when we checked that database against the education database. Education hasn't made a decision yet about what they're going to do to verify those that do not have the IRS compliance. So I'm very concerned. They need to make sure they have something in place to do this.
Do they have a deadline before they need to come up with how they're going to actually implement for the other 30%?
Yeah, I'll check on whether they have a deadline or not, but they should have one before they start the program again. But they've missed a lot of deadlines. Like we're looking at now at the free application for student loan aid, the FAFSA program, all the problems they had. what happened there, and we're trying to get all the data out of them. You know, this income-driven repayment program, if they implement the recommendations successfully, CBOs, or Joint Committee on Taxation, or CBO, I forget which one, have estimated it could save $2 billion. So it's very important. I'll follow
$2 billion
up.
over time?
Yeah, over time.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we'll follow up with them, and I'll let you know on the time frame. If they don't have one, I'll recommend they establish one, obviously.
Very good. And you anticipated, one of my questions was, what kind of savings do you anticipate? So since GAO has been conducting an annual duplication report in 2011, your agency has made over 2,000 recommendations to federal agencies and to Congress on how to reduce or eliminate duplication and overlap in federal programs. And the execution of those recommendations has resulted in $667.5 billion in savings. I commend you for that. But I would just say it's not near enough. Why do I say that? Because from 2011 to where we sit today, our deficit has grown, or excuse me, our national debt has grown by $25 trillion, and we maintain a consistent structural deficit in excess of $2 trillion. And so we need you to find these programs and weed them out and help us turn our woeful budget system around. The rest of it belongs to us. We've got to take care of it, and that's across both parties. It's not one party or another. Both parties are to blame there. And so I want to turn to the report more broadly. You identified 112 recommendations and matters in 42 topic areas in the 2024 duplication report. What are the common themes and threads among programs with opportunities for cost savings and revenue enhancement?
Yeah, some of the most common areas is in the overlap and duplication, fragmentation, not following best practices for collaboration. And I'd mentioned earlier in the chairman's questioning, I think Congress should legislate those 8 criteria so that agencies that have interagency councils can work on it. In the other areas, in cost savings and revenue enhancements, there are a number of recommendations at IRS to better focus their enforcement efforts. And in that area also, we have recommendations to the Congress. Like, for example, in the past, we recommended that the Congress accelerate the date for W-2s to be provided to IRS. Before, employees had to get them in January, by the end of January, but IRS didn't get them in Social Security until April. So a lot of people were filing fake tax returns, and there was a lot of identity theft going on. So Congress expedited the reporting of the wage data. Now it's saved $7 billion from fraudulent tax payments. We have other recommendations to the Congress. To your point, one of the big cost drivers in the federal debt is health care. We've got recommendations, if you equalize the payments for Medicare for people going to doctor's offices affiliated with hospitals to what you do in the private practice. Right now we pay the hospitals more, affiliated with the hospitals. You can save $141 billion over 10 years in Medicare. We've got other recommendations to save hundreds of millions in Medicaid. I think the Medicaid program needs a lot more oversight and attention. Both of these programs, Medicare and Medicaid, last year reported collectively over $100 billion in improper payments. And so we've got recommendations to address those issues. So we're trying to target our recommendations to some of the major spending areas in the government, particularly the health care area, and to deal with the tax gap issue by better, we have a lot of revenue that should be coming into the government. The latest estimate extrapolated for 2014 to 16 was $428 billion a year. But IRS estimates that the current tax gap between taxes owed and taxes collected is over $600 billion. We also have a lot of money going out the door that shouldn't go out the door in improper payments and fraud. We estimated that, or the government agencies reported over $236 billion in improper payments for 2023, and that's not everything. There's a lot of programs that aren't reporting payments.
I find this fascinating, but my time is way expired.
Oh.
So, Mr. Dodaro, good to see you again. Thanks for your testimony.
Thank you.
I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your indulgence.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. If the gentleman would know that I've told this subcommittee, that we're going to have a slow gavel. The purpose of this hearing is to get information out, not to time it at 5 minutes or 5 minutes and 1 second.
I'd like some time back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back his time. The gentlewoman from Dallas, Texas, Ms. Crocker, is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, almost afternoon to you. In this committee, we are charged with this vast task of trying to make sure that we are making the federal government more accountable, more efficient, and more cost-effective for the American people. And reading through this new report, I'm struck by just how many ways GAO has said that Congress can lead this charge. So my first question to you is, when GAO issues a report, it is common for the agency to include a section that talks about matters for congressional consideration. What exactly does that mean?
The matters for congressional consideration mean recommendations we're making to Congress to act, as distinct from recommendations we're making to the departments and agencies to act. We do that in deference to Congress's constitutional responsibilities.
Thank you so much. And how many matters for congressional consideration are in the latest duplication report?
In the latest one, I'll get you the number here, but we've made over time, I think, 240 of those matters for congressional recommendations. So they're fewer than to the agencies, but the implementation rate's been a little better with the agencies than the matters for the Congress. Most of the money you've heard mentioned, $667 billion that we've saved the government by implementing our recommendations, have come from actions the Congress has taken.
Okay. If I said that the number was around 112, would you have any reason to disagree?
Well, there's 112 recommendations in the latest report. Not all are matters.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Can you briefly walk us through a few of these matters for congressional consideration?
Yes, sure. One I was just talking about, which is to equalize the Medicare payments. If an individual needs to have an evaluation by a doctor and you go to one that's affiliated with a hospital, Medicare pays you more than if you go to somebody who's in private practice. CBO estimates that that could save the government $141 billion over 10 years. We also have an open recommendation that Congress reauthorize FirstNet, which is the emergency response network for first responders. Very important. And they also have Congress needs to give them additional authority to collect revenues from users of that system. That could save $15 billion over time. We have 12 matters that, another one is in Medicaid. A lot of demonstrations are given states more flexibility, but it's supposed to be budget neutral. They can try new things, but it shouldn't cost more money. We found that's not the case. It always costs more money. And you could save billions more in there. And we've got other ones on equalizing the payments between, for example, Medicare fee-for-service and Medicare Advantage. They true up there because you don't have, one's on a capitated basis, the Medicare Advantage, and the other one's on fee-for-services. And so at the end of the year, they look at beneficiary characteristics, and they end up making an adjustment to the payments. But by not using the most recent information and better characteristics of the beneficiaries under Medicare Advantage, we're overpaying probably to that area.
Thank you for that. Sure. Another thing that I'd like to ask you about is, can you tell us how many of the matters that the GAO has given to Congress are still open? I know you kind of laid out some, but.
Okay, since 2011, we've made 140 matters as this work to the Congress. 76 are open.
Okay. So approximately a little more than half are still open.
That's correct.
Okay. And of those
Now,
matters,
I would say, just let me add, though,
Okay.
of those that are open, about 40% have been introduced in legislation
Okay.
in the last Congress or this Congress. So there are some efforts being made by different parts of the Congress to implement those matters. And so, but they haven't been pushed across the goal line yet.
okay. It looks like I'm running out of time. Or I'm actually out of time. But thank you so much. I appreciate you, and I'll yield.
Sure.
Gentlewoman yields back her time, and now defer to the distinguished gentleman, the chairman of the Republican Policy Committee, Chairman Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to stay on that theme of Ms. Crockett. What percent of I want to clarify again, what percent of GAO recommendations are not implemented?
Well, there's two sets of numbers. If you talk about all our work and all our reports, not just this one we're
Well,
testifying
you don't
on.
do the work for no good reason, so I would assume that 100% should be implemented. So what percent?
75 on average, 75% of our recommendations. That's pretty steady over time.
They are or are not?
They are.
Okay,
They are
so a
implemented.
quarter or not.
Right.
But I would assume that the other 25% would result in savings, more efficiency in the operation of the federal government agencies, and they should be implemented.
Right.
Some of these recommendations that you've made from the past conversations you and I have been open for a long time. Is that correct?
Some of them, yes.
Yeah. What could be done to ensure that the GAO's recommendations are implemented?
Yeah, we just issued this week a report listing every open matter that we have from congressional, that we've suggested to the Congress, along with what cost savings could occur if the Congress implemented our recommendations. So we've been asked by the Congress to address this issue. Give us in one report all your open matters that you've recommended to Congress, and it just came out a few days ago. Of there, we're 21 matters open that could save over $1 billion, or 20 of them, or 12 of them could be over $1 billion. The other ones are millions or hundreds of millions.
But,
I'd be happy to submit that report for the record here.
well, Mr. Chairman, I think we could help on the implementation side, obviously with legislation, but also with oversight. Because I do think it's incumbent upon agencies to act on these recommendations. And the history of GAO's recommendations are pretty well documented, some substantial savings to the federal government. A couple of things I want to ask about. You've made some recommendations on disposable radioactive sources or you've looked into that. Have you made recommendations on disposal of radioactive sources?
Yes, yes.
Have they been acted on?
Not yet.
How about on safeguarding? Now, this is something I think is extremely important, is safeguarding federally funded research from foreign threats.
I don't believe they're fully implemented yet.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the failure to safeguard research, that federally funded research, and from my perspective, any domestic research that impacts our national security needs to be, those recommendations need to be fully acted on.
I don't think, Congressman Palmer, that those sets of particular recommendations will be implemented without congressional attention and action.
You think they will be?
They will not be.
They will not be.
They will not be fully implemented.
Mr. Chairman,
that's my opinion.
I think we need to make this a priority. And I know it's going to shock you that I'm going to ask about improper payments because we spent years working on this. But you're talking about duplications. In the case of duplication, is that not also a problem in terms of improper payments?
Well, it could be depending upon, it doesn't really fit the definition that we have, but we have, it fits, in addition to overlap and duplication, we include cost savings and revenue enhancement. So the cost savings and proper payments fit within that category.
And you say if we could eliminate some additional duplications, would save another $70+ billion?
Well, no, we said that that was what was saved from last year's report to this year. So that's in the bank already. There are tens of billions of dollars that could be implemented. We have a report coming out soon that has a simulation. If all of GAO's open recommendations are implemented, that have financial benefits. And a lot of our recommendations are improve economy and efficiency, can't be measured, or improve public safety, for example. You'd save up to $180 billion.
We've had this discussion in the past as well about in regard to improper payments, and I think it would apply to duplications, and that is the failure of coordination and in some cases communication between federal agencies and between federal and state agencies.
Right.
And I think when we first started this discussion, one of the big issues that we identified was antiquated data systems.
Right.
How much of a problem is that now? Does that persist?
It's still a problem and an impediment. It's not the only one, but it's definitely one. And I think, for example, there much more attention of the Congress ought to be paid to the Medicaid program.
Right.
Medicaid program is one of the fastest growing programs. Each state's a little bit different. The other area of antiquated programs that the Congress really ought to focus on as well is unemployment insurance. That was a huge problem that led to a lot of fraud. And if we have at some point there's going to be another economic downturn or some issue, we're going to rely more on the unemployment insurance to help people who are really in need of help. If you don't have those systems modernized, you're going to have a real problem. I know when the pandemic came, and Congress didn't want to send the $600 to everybody in supplemental payment. They wanted to gear it to whatever that person was earning at that time. So you didn't overcompensate people more in unemployment than what they were gaining from their job. But the systems couldn't do that. I got calls ahead of time, can we do that? And it just wasn't possible at that time.
We've got all kind of problems with this. I was very involved in Alabama looking into fraud in respect to that. We've taken down a lot of the guardrails, just failure to verify eligibility and responding to requests for unemployment benefits from foreign IP addresses.
Right.
I mean, it's across the board. Mr. Chairman, I do think that some of the things we've discussed today would merit congressional action. I think additional oversight from this committee. I could go on for quite a while. Mr. Dodaro and I have had many discussions about some of these issues, and I greatly appreciate the work of the GAO and your staff. You do a great job. We got to do a better job, though, of making sure that these recommendations are implemented. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the past 14 years, GAO's duplication, overlap, and fragmentation report has made critical findings and recommendations to make our government more efficient. These findings and recommendations have had an impact. Congress and agencies have addressed nearly 2/3 of GAO's 2008 matters and recommendations. Mr. Dodaro, that progress has yielded significant financial benefits. Is that correct?
Yes.
I believe it is $667 billion.
Billion.
And that's an increase of about $71 billion since last year's report.
That's correct.
In response to GAO's urging, the Office of Management and Budget leveraged the buying power of the federal government to save almost $49 billion over a 4-year period. GAO also goaded the Small Business Administration's implementation of a new automatic screening system, among other oversight controls. That saved the taxpayers more than $13 billion in just 3 years. GAO's duplication work is about finding ways to make each federal agency go as far as it possibly can. GAO's report recognizes the critical value of these programs while improving their efficiencies. Mr. Dodaro, it seems to me that this report shows us what GAO does best, finding process fixes that can yield huge results for the American people. Is that fair?
It's not only fair, it's absolutely true.
In this regard, this report is an excellent roadmap for Congress to further strengthen invaluable federal programs, giving us a to-do list of items for legislative reform. Although it may not be so obvious today, over my decades in Congress, I have seen us come together in a bipartisan way to create legislative fixes to government operations, improving daily life for the American people. These may not be flashy topics, but they are the nuts and bolts of improving government and delivering vital services to the American people. Let's take a simple example that I mentioned earlier. In 2017 and 2021, GAO highlighted that agencies could potentially save taxpayers billions of dollars if they simply use collective buying power for things like office supplies. Mr. Dodaro, how does leveraging buying power help save money?
Well, you don't have individual agencies going out and basically, buying these things themselves. So there are a lot of common items, particularly in the information technology area, where the government can use their buying power to get a better price out of the market by having a greater quantity of those items that are bought collectively rather than everybody buying something simply. And so it's just a matter of market dynamics. If you have a bigger order and a demand, you can negotiate to get a better price.
It is clear that GAO's recommendations are intended to improve the federal programs that serve the American people, not gut them. I look forward to opportunities to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for implementation of GAO's recommendation. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
And thank you, Mr. Dodaro, for being here today. I have a lot of questions. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get to all of them in the 5 minutes, but I would like to first talk about the student loan income-driven repayment plans. So that for federal students, the borrowers can apply for income-driven repayment plans, which use the borrower's supposedly their taxable income and their family size to determine what the pay rate is. GAO recommended that the Department of Education obtain data to verify income information for borrowers that were reporting zero income on income-driven repayment applications. What's been the result of that recommendation?
Due to implementation of our recommendations, the Congress had given education the authority to use IRS data to verify income if the applicants for the income-driven payment program would agree to allow them their tax data to be accessed by IRS. That was part of the law.
Wouldn't that be a tacit consent if they're making the application that they understand that their data would be accessed?
No. No, they have to give permission in order to do it. There are criminal penalties for IRS sharing tax data without appropriate authority. So that was a safeguard put into place. So that's in place now. But what isn't in place is for the people who don't agree to have their tax data accessed.
Right.
What is education going to do to verify their income? Now, they can get commercial sources. There are plenty available for that. they can use the, if they get authority from the Congress, the new hire database that the HHS, Health and Human Services, has. It has the most up-to-date wage information for people in the country. It's used for child enforcement purposes, but it can be used. That's what we used when we compared that data to what people had put in their applications at education. That's where we found 95,000 plans were reporting zero income, but that data showed that that wasn't necessarily the case.
So what does the Department of Education have the authority, if they were to be able to get this private sector data and compare that with the claims?
Sure.
And then if you have incongruency, then what would the next steps be? Could they require at that point or deny them unless they provide their tax forms?
They could provide additional support.
And is that happening?
We don't know yet. We're going to look at this. This is just newly implemented. You know, there was a pause during the COVID for people in the repayment of their income-driven payment plan. So that's just started up most recently. So, and people have to recertify every year. So we're going to look at this and see what they're doing at the Education Department to handle this particular gap.
And then I have two more questions. One, I was intrigued by the discussion about our universities and your recommendations to secure make sure that our intellectual property, the security of the United States is protected at our research facilities. And it sounds like that there are some recommendations that will require steps from Congress. Can you elaborate on that?
I'm not sure. Yeah, our recommendations really were to the executive branch, is what I thought, that there be more efforts on to determine foreign ownership and control or influence over these particular areas. Now, what we found is that some agencies were doing a good job and using intelligence information and others, but there was no sharing going on across the government. So one agency might be making a grant to the same place, then our agency wouldn't do so because they had concerns and had additional information. So we asked the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy in the White House, which is supposed to put out government-wide guidance on this, to put out better guidance so there's more thorough vetting ahead of time, because the agencies have a lot of questions.
And then within my short time, this is a big question.
All right.
You mentioned that there's potential saving opportunities with the Medicaid systems that for states to modernize. Can you elaborate on those, and if there's any action we need to take in Congress?
Yeah, I think the main action is oversight. I think the Medicaid program needs a lot more oversight about what's going on. For example, they estimate there was $50 billion in improper payments last year, but it's mostly in the fee-for-service portion. In the Medicaid Advantage portion, which, as you know, is almost half of the amount of spending now in Medicaid, there's really not very good auditing of what's going on in the Medicare Advantage program. We've encouraged, and CMS has started to do more audits over there, and they're finding some of the same overpayment problems and preliminary estimates in that area. But Congress can do a lot more. Also, Congress can require that any Medicaid demonstration, about half of Medicaid spending right now is because the states came to the federal government and they said, you know, we want to try this new process, and if we do so, we think we could better serve the public.
Waiver program.
Waiver, yeah, exactly, the waiver program. But the waiver program was supposed to be budget neutral, so it wasn't supposed to cost more money, and it has, big time. And so we're allowing waivers that are costing more, and they're not really, in many cases, demonstrating the benefits.
Better outcome for the
better
patients.
outcomes, exactly. So that program, and it's fast growing. It's fast growing. So I think it's always used to help during economic downturns and other things. We have a recommendation that Congress act to provide during economic downturns a formula that would be put in place to more timely provide assistance, during high periods of unemployment for people that would then require Medicaid, be more efficient and effective than some of the approaches Congress uses in times of economic crisis.
Thank you.
Have an opportunity, and thank you, I put the wrong talk on. Mr. Dodaro, I want to go back to, there's been some bit of discussion about health care here today, and probably 4 or 5 specific areas you've spoken of. I wondered if you would walk through for Mr. Mfume and I generally the right way, what you do, how you deal with the law, how you deal with an agency, how you deal with Inspector General, on what might be what we knew several months ago was a report about people being on FEHB. Maybe many people being on that should not be, either not paying, added improperly, still being on, maybe when they, across the board. Are you prepared maybe to give us a walkthrough on that or high-level idea about that? Because that would be something seemingly that someone should have within their immediate vestiges of their authority, and to have to come back and show them where they've not been faithful to that would be distressing, I'm sure, to both of us on a bipartisan basis.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that was our report. The IG's done some work in that area. The estimates of improper payments where there are ineligible people on the federal employee health programs range from $1 billion to $3 billion. The $1 billion is by OPM, the $3 billion is by the OPM-IG. We've looked at it. We've made recommendations that they have people provide documentation to support the number of people on each health care plan. Now, OPM has started. If somebody wants to change a plan during open season, or they have a life event where they're allowed to, the birth of a child or whatever, to add somebody, to ask for documentation. But they have not yet gone back and looked at all the people that are already in the system as to whether they have legitimate numbers of people, not beneficiaries, or people who are eligible for services that are legitimate. And we think that kind of audit needs to take place. Now, part of the issue that OPM has is they don't have central data, even though it's all at the agencies, the individual federal agencies. And so they're trying to get it more of a central repository so they could have more controls in place to check on these things right now. But there's ways that they could do this audit. They could sample across the federal agencies. They could get some participation. But there has to be a thorough audit done of existing people that are on the federal employees' health benefit system. It's one of the biggest benefit systems in the country. And for decades, nobody checked these things. Whatever the federal employee put down, and that's what was there.
Self-reporting.
It was basically, in an area of trust. Now, and when people started checking, they started finding out, well, no, there were some people on there that weren't really eligible to be part of that person's health benefit program. I've talked to the OPM director about this, the now acting director, and encouraged them to implement our recommendations, and hopefully they will.
What generally is the take on this specific issue? I'm not asking you to say which person.
Yeah.
But generally, agency responsibility, IG doing their own internal investigation, trying to figure out where that link might be that is a disconnect, an office or an audit or a process that did not yield something. Have they gotten far enough along there to say, oh, I see what we need to be doing or what further information we need to correct that circumstance?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think in this case, the current acting director of OPM knows exactly what needs to be done. He has a background in insurance areas, and he knows what the shortcomings are. The question he's wrestling with is how can he implement all these things that need to be implemented as soon as possible, like getting a central repository in place. So some of it's going to take time, but in the meantime, they need to have an audit, and that's his responsibility to orchestrate that audit, working with other departments and agencies as he needs to. He could use the IG to help him do that work, but that's where the locus of responsibility is right now.
Several hours ago, we had a brief discussion with you, both of us, with you, about the things that you felt like we could partner on better, and you mentioned those 8 items, I believe, and while I was aware of them and you and I spoke about them on the phone earlier in the week, and I did see those are broad concepts. Those are necessary management tool sets that you would want our agencies, you'd want OPM to be certainly involved in that, IGs, you'd want anybody that's going to be a secretary of a department perhaps to agree with that. This is a specific issue. This is one that deals with an agency and their responsibility. How did they handle the feedback that came from OPM and you about this issue?
Well, I think they recognize the significance of the issue, but like in a lot of cases, people are slow to act on a recommendation. That's why we keep following up. Every year, I mentioned I send a letter to every department head of the agency. Here you have an example. On average, a political appointee spends about 2 years in the federal government. So there's a lot of turnover, and that's part of the problem. And this occurs throughout government. Now here you got somebody who's just stepped into the acting job. Now he was a deputy before, so he had some responsibility for this. But it's up to him to take action as soon as possible in this regard and marshal whatever sources they have. He can partner with OMB and get some additional support from OMB, which I think he could use in order to start this process of auditing the current people who are enrolled in that program and how many people they report as eligible to receive services under their plan. I mean, this isn't rocket science. I mean, it's basically looking at those things and doing some good auditing, and it could be tackled, as soon as the resources could be marshaled to do it.
Resources or a person that decides they want to do it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, you have to have leadership. You have to have the will. You have to have the will and the leadership, and it has to be sustained leadership. And that's one of our criteria on the high-risk list. You don't get off the high-risk list unless you have sustained leadership commitment, and that can come from multiple people, over time.
That's why in '97, in working with a gentleman named Robert Shea, we developed that red light. I think you helped us, red light, green light, yellow light process, where we wanted agencies to move.
Yeah. Well, one thing you did during that period, too, that I think was very effective, and you may want to consider this again, you had a results caucus.
We did.
And you had certain members had assigned a high-risk area to them to work it in depth. And that was very helpful because they were able to, really dig in deeper and understand the nuances and the details that needed to be done. And so, I mean, that was one model that I think that had some good success. There are other approaches that could be made.
I completely agree with you. Before we get too far away from this, OMB presents their budget to the Congress from the President. Is there a good way to link up the results that you see with putting those with the funding mechanism that shows some bit of delivery or open process, and to have the budget people asking the same people that the government accountability people are asking for. Would that be helpful? This was Mr. Womack wrote me this note, said, hey, this is his addition. He thinks it's a good idea. What do you think?
Well, actually, it's already supposed to be implemented. I mean, the Congress passed it's called the GAO-IG Act.
Right.
And what each budget submission, each agency is supposed to list open GAO and IG recommendations and what they're going to do to address those recommendations. Now, whether that's working or not, it's one of the things that we need to look into along with the IGs. Our initial glance at it was that it was very, it wasn't uniformly applied. Agencies were all over the place. Some did it right, others didn't do it at all. So there's no enforcement mechanisms in place. The OMB didn't require it, that they look at as part of the budget process and make sure that they were including that information in there. So as usual, Bill's got a great idea. I think it's the concepts are in place, but it needs to be effectively implemented. And if Congress isn't saying, well, where is that information? Why don't we have it here as part of the budget submission? Agencies are going to get the idea, well, it's just another mandate Congress put on us, and nobody's going to use it. So
well, if it doesn't become a shiny object to someone,
it becomes a hollow requirement.
Right.
And so I think much more can be done with that. And also these priority recommendation letters that I send each year, I send to all the appropriators as well as the oversight committees, and so that could be part of the process. I have one for OMB itself as well.
Isn't that great?
It's wonderful.
We have several for them, too. Mr. Fume, gentleman's recognized.
Okay, well, Mr. Dodaro, this has been interesting to say the very least. And I am hoping that in consultation with the chair, that we don't let a year go by before we have you back. In fact, for those of us who might be lucky enough to return to this place after November elections, it's probably something that we may want to consider late in the year, but I'm going to defer to the chair on that and indicate on the record that I just think that we need to hear from you as much as we can over and over again. And I'm hoping also that what we've gleaned from this will give us enough energy and focus to do something that's not hollow, to do something that's long-lasting. And I listened to your comments about this results caucus. Predates me, but it sounds like it's a great idea. We are part of the world's largest bureaucracy. And if we ever thought we were not, all we had to do was listen to these several hours of testimony today. And that largest bureaucracy in the world really creates for us the greatest challenge. And all I could think about as I listened to the questions of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and my comments and the chair's comments is that we are throwing money away in so many different areas and so many different ways, and really missing the opportunity of the wealth of this society to be able to efficiently operate in a way where equity, economy, efficiency, and efficacy are all working together. So the challenge is really, really large. You've given us a lot to think about. I listened to some of the comments that came about earlier in the last couple of hours. From my side of the aisle, if you walk away with anything today, please keep in mind that some of the issues that were raised earlier dealing with equity, and particularly bias that has been able to be identified, as well as duplication that's been identified so many ways, are really very important issues. And I must tell you, if there was ever a concept that I would consider a joke, it is this whole notion of self-certification. I don't know where that came from, how it got into the government, or why we even think that it would work. So I'm hoping, and I don't know if there are other places that certification is alive and well, that you continue to point that out to us, because we can do something legitimately, legislatively, to make sure that that goes away. We saw what it did to us during the pandemic. It's a disaster. I mean, a real disaster. And the other thing is that I mentioned earlier, in terms of the algorithmic selections that take place, particularly here as it relates to IRS or the login.gov situation. They need options. That can't be the sole method of identifying, verifying, and moving forward. And I was glad that you mentioned that the real next frontier here is AI and what's going on with that and how that can disrupt the entire effort and all the good efforts of people who are working to eradicate the inequities that may exist. So you've got a big job. I see why you've hung around for 51 years, because you can't finish it. Every day there's a new issue and a new problem. We thank you very much for this time and hope to see you again. You know, on the wall behind you is the portrait of a former chair of this committee, the late Elijah Cummings, who was a friend of mine for 42 years. And he would, in the simplest way, remind us over and over again, and I quote, "We can do better than this." So thank you, sir, for your time. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Yeah, thank you.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Mafumi, if I might, Mr. Cummings, I was in this room with him many, many times, and he talked about the importance of why people were in public service. He used to say it was to feed their souls, and it was a very apt saying. He was, very committed, as both of you are, to making improvements in these areas. And everything, also, the one area I don't want you to lose sight of is making these improvements builds better trust in government. And we desperately need to work together to do that right now. And our institutions deliver for the American people what they expect. So I thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm sorry to interject, but I have very fond memories of Mr. Cummings.
Well, he was a remarkable individual and friend, as I said. And maybe on your last point about building trust and the fact that it hasn't been done, that's why it's so typical to hear the joke sometimes that I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. People don't believe that anymore. Thank you, sir.
I want to thank the distinguished gentleman, my colleague, Mr. Dodaro. The bottom line is, when we spoke the other day, I told you that I thought you would be well worth our time. But I also told you today that we wanted to be worth your time. You and your colleagues that have joined you today have been value add to us. And I hope that even though we didn't have a lot of huge shiny objects that draw a lot of people, we did run through this subcommittee, that you receive feedback and questions and opportunities from people. And I think we spoke pretty much with a similar voice, if not the same. And that is that we do, as you just suggested it, see that something has to be fair, but when it's fair, there's not going to be self-reporting. There'll be accountability associated with that. I spoke several weeks ago to a new citizen indoctrination where we are bringing people through the process, and I talked to them about responsibilities. Today, when they raised their hand and they were new citizens, there's a right and a responsibility. And I do believe that these things offer some bit of balance. And I think that you, of all people in this government, bring that to bear. You should be thanked for it. Your agency should be thanked. But on behalf of us, we appreciate it again today. We're going to close the hearing right now, but we'd like to come down and get our picture with you, and alluded earlier that there may be some students that are present here today. And I'd like to ask that as Mr. Mfume and I walk down, that our students would come and stand behind us, and we would be able to shake your hand and let this be a testament to them that there is a lot done in this town when done properly and together, it can be achieved. And I hope that we've done a little bit of that today.
You sure have. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Okay, well, we've now heard from this. This closes the hearing that was today. Thank you.